On this episode, we'll take a closer look at the future of images on the World Wide Web. This episode doesn't have a sponsor. So if you want to help support the show, go to tfttf.com/support. That's tfttf.com/support. Thank you. This is Tips from the Top Floor, episode 795 for Thursday, October the 16th, 2017.
Tips from the top floor, tips from the top, alright, from the top floor.
Hey, it's Chris Marquardt again. You're listening to Tips from the Top Floor, the longest running photography show on the planet. I'm going to make a few episodes that are slightly shorter than usual, and that's because I'm in this pre-travel frenzy, and then I will be in the, well, Chris is gone situation while I'm in Bhutan in the Himalayas with a bunch of amazing people, and we'll be there. I'll be there for almost 3 weeks, so there are, just brace yourselves for a few episodes that are a little bit more tight, but I am still answering your questions here. On this episode, for example, it's Rob who's asking a great question.
Hi Chris, it's Rob here from the Adams Factory in Sydney, Australia. Apple have started using HEIF as its file format on its phones in the latest operating system. It raised an interesting question for me around what's the appropriate file format and compression to use for files going onto the web these days, when you consider the different social media uses and what they do with images, as well as the concern as a photographer on how to best present an image on the screen, no matter what size or shape or format it's in. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this particular topic. Thanks again for all your time and effort you put into the show, and I look forward to hearing your response. Cheers.
Thanks, Rob. HEIF, H-E-I-F, the High Efficiency Image File Format. That's one of the new, that's the new format that has been presented by Apple. There's, of course, still JPEG that most of us use for the web. There's DNG, there's RAW files, there's TIFF files, which are not used online in the web, but more in an editing context, in a storage context. But let's try to look at this and try to put it in terms that most people can understand, because it is confusing. It really is. Let's first, before we go into that, do a quick comparison between RAW and JPEG, because that is what most of us will be using. Camera set on RAW, so you shoot in the RAW format. That gives you a lot of data. That's a very good thing, because that will allow you a lot of editing without introducing artifacts. Unfortunately, it's also proprietary. RAW files, the CRW, the old Canon RAW, the CR2, the new Canon RAW, the NEF, the whatever. There's lots of them. Then there's a less proprietary version, the DNG, that's an Adobe format. And one of the big disadvantages of all of those RAW files is they need development. They need to be treated in some way. That's what Lightroom is for. That's what all the other RAW editing suites are for. They will take that raw data and make it into a proper looking image. And then you have all the editing sliders and so on. So that is RAW. Then there's JPEG. And JPEG has been around for quite a while. And it is a rather small, compact file format compared to RAW. It is compressed. It is pre-edited, so to speak. If you export something from Lightroom, it will into a JPEG. It will inherit all your edits that you made in Lightroom. They get baked into the file pretty much. Pretty universal. Everything can read JPEG. Your camera does. Even if you shoot RAW, there will be a little JPEG embedded in the RAW file, and that's what you then see on the back of the camera, on the display. Disadvantage of JPEG is there's not that much data in there for editing. JPEG is an 8-bit format per color channel, so there's for the red, the green, and the blue channel, there's only 256 brightness levels, and that is not a lot. You can, if you put that on a gradient in front of you, you will see those individual pieces. It will be easy to distinguish them, and only in a JPEG, when they are combined in 3 color channels, will that look okay for our eyes. And that's why it's being used on the web so much for photos, because it's small enough, it loads fast. Now let's look at HEIF, or H-E-I-F, but I think the official pronunciation now is HEIF, which is not invented by Apple. It's been designed by the MPEG Group. The MPEG Group is a standards body. It is an ISO standard. Everyone can use it. It's open. Everyone can use it. I'm not sure what the patent situation is on that, but it's a standard that everyone can use. And it's also an interesting hybrid. It has pretty good compression, better than JPEG. It supports audio as well as something called timed text, which I believe is for like subtitles and things, maybe lyrics, I don't know. It allows to put multiple things in one file. It's been defined in, I think it's from 2013, and then I think since 2015 it's been finalized, and since then companies or people can use it. It can store, okay, too many acronyms, 4-letter acronyms, HEVC, HEVG. I'm not sure that's easy to pronounce, but it can store HEVC coded images. That's the high efficiency video codec. That's another rather new thing. And it can combine multiple images in one file, like a high res and a low res one. Pretty similar to what we were seeing from RAW, where you have the RAW file plus a little JPEG in there. It supports things like burst photos in a single file. That's if your camera can do that, like a 10 picture burst, that you can stick those into a single HEIF file. It supports sequences of like Apple's Live Images is a good example for that, where you have these little Harry Potter-like images that move a bit. It supports, of course, then also focus stacks. Like you can have multiple images at different focus distances in there, or exposure stacks for doing HDR and that kind of stuff. So looks like a pretty convenient thing, given the things that we use our cameras for these days. Even includes some editing features like orientation change, portrait versus landscape format, and cropping and things. It's all built in. There's no re-encoding required. I think it's through metadata. There's even some basic editing operations that are then non-destructive. So you would have one file that has the photo in it plus the recipe to edit it. And that's a pretty convenient thing too, to keep all that in one place. And then it's easily portable, and you can put it on other devices. And it's a pretty universal and pretty good format. And as it allows to stack images, I mean, just imagine putting multiple frames of an animation in there. It could even replace GIF files that we see all over the internet these days. From a technical side, it also is interesting because it supports 10-bit images. The images are 10 bits. If you go back to JPEG, it's only an 8-bit format. So 8 bits, 256 levels per channel. If you double that, that's 9 bits, so that's 512. Double that again, 1024 levels of brightness per channel. That increases the amount of data quite a bit. That's a lot of data, a lot of colors, a lot of contrasts and stuff that you see in there. And that will solve one problem, or at least make it much better and easier to deal with. And that is the banding. In a JPEG with its only 8 bits, only 256 brightness levels per channel, you end up, if you compress too much, you end up with bands of stuff, especially in skies and things. If you have a blue sky, which never is like exactly the same tone all over the picture, it's a gradient. There's a middle blue on the left side, and then on the right side, there's a slightly darker tone than middle blue. There's just tiny differences, and if you compress that too much, you will get banding. You will see bands over the skies. I think everyone has seen those by now. And with a 10-bit format, that is just not going to be as much of a problem anymore, if at all. Also, it compresses better. They say it's like half the size of JPEG. So you can get the same image into about half the size. Well, up to half the size. I haven't really played with HEIF that much so far, so I haven't really done any first-person testing. That's just what I read about it. But again, your question, remember, it's an ISO standard. Everyone can use it. And as it has these many advantages, there's a really good chance it might replace JPEG and GIF and a few other things sometime in the future on the web. But that, of course, means the web browsers will have to support it. There are, at this point, some workarounds, like some JPEG libraries you can include in your web page and then have HEIF pictures on there that your browser will then... It's a workaround. Like any new technology, if this is not natively supported by the web browser, then it won't really get that much of a distribution. But given the advantages, I would expect web browsers to, within the next couple of years, probably include that. So you will then most likely be able to put native HEIF images in your web pages, and then they will show up on web pages and they will load faster and they will be just way more convenient. Just imagine live picture stacks in a web page. There's tons of stuff you can think about what that would enable. And it's smaller. So in short, for now, I will stay with JPEG because browsers don't support it yet, and JPEG is pretty much guaranteed to be supported forever. And the entire web uses JPEG right now. Billions over billions of pages have have JPEG images on them. And I mean, just imagine what would happen if a browser manufacturer would just stop supporting JPEG. It wouldn't happen, because that would be the end of that browser. Even just 2 decades down the road, there will still be plenty of JPEGs on the web because, of course, people won't go back and update all their old pages. And if they're around, we now have web pages that are like, that feel like they're 100 years old, and they still use JPEG and GIFs and stuff. But when it comes to the compression of JPEG, so JPEG is the standard for now. JPEG, color, space, sRGB, that is the standard at this point. That's the de facto standard to use if you're on the web. And yes, you can use other color spaces, but then some browsers won't interpret that properly, and a huge mess. I could talk about this for hours. But about the compression of JPEG, and that's one of the things that trips a lot of people. When you save something to JPEG, there's this slider. Often there's a slider, and it's either a quality slider or a compression slider, which is in itself not very intuitive, because the more compression, the less quality. But then you have this, depending on what the slider means, it will be inverse, right? The the quality gets better if you slide it to the right, but the file gets bigger, and on the other one, it's the same when you slide it to the left. That is confusing. But I will not be able to give you like the percentage here. Put it to X% compression, and that's where it needs to be. That's just impossible, because the software, the different pieces of software that do the compression are not consistent. If you have a slider on 50% in one piece of software, and you take another app that compresses JPEG and you put it on 50% there, and there's a good chance that this compression won't be the same. That's just arbitrary decisions by the manufacturers. I mean, Lightroom is a very extreme example there. Look at the compression percentage in Lightroom. It's not even linear. It suggests a change. Like if you move the slider, you get this gauge going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and so on, percentage-wise. But under the hood, it's not even doing that. It's using like 71% and 78% quality is identical. Internally, I think it's only 10 steps of quality, and it's in chunks. So slide it between 71 and 75 and 78, and you will, in all 3 cases, get the exact same compression. That's, I'm not sure if that's a good decision, but that's the way they decided. Also, if you slide it all the way down to 0, it's not 0. I believe someone checked it out. I think it's about 20% compression when you slide it to 0. Lightroom is just trying to keep you from making the worst mistakes. So slide it all the way down, and you will still get not the maximum compression, which in most cases you don't want, because that will create pretty unusable images anyway. So in short, the compression depends on the image. I can give you my go-to number in Lightroom, and that's about 7, somewhere in the 70s. Again, doesn't matter if it's plus minus a few because it's the same. 71, 72, something like that. That tends to give me the quality that is virtually, well, not virtually undistinguishable, but very hard to distinguish between that and the original. And then you have to keep in mind that some images will compress better and others will not compress as good. And that's especially true for those with fine gradients in mostly one color channel, like blue skies, for example. If you have very fine gradation in the sky, then I wouldn't go to 30%, but then there are other images. I'm speaking Lightroom right now. There are other images that I can go to 30% in Lightroom and I'll go, hey, that looks perfectly fine. And the size is really tiny then. So maybe to develop a feeling for that. And again, this will not be consistent with Lightroom, but that's one of the tools that I use once in a blue moon, but I do use it every now and then. That will help you give you a good idea of how much you can compress an image without it becoming an issue. Try iResize, iResize, iResize. It's a Mac tool, and it has that thing called compression test. It is a tool that allows you to compress images. So if I have a web page that needs to be as compact as possible, and I want to get the pictures down to the minimum that is still acceptable, that's where I will use iResize. And you put your images in there, and then you choose one and you open the compression test. And that is just your image on the screen with a big slider on the top. And then you slide that slider with 100% quality or 0 compression on the right and maximum compression on the left. And you slide it down from the right to the left. And in real time, you get a preview of the compression results. You see what it looks like. And you look at the sky, and that sky will at one point will start banding. You will see those bands, and then you can back off a bit, go back a bit to the right, and then at one point you will be like, okay, that is perfectly acceptable, and it will give you the kilobytes of the after the compression. So you can kind of balance that with your own visual perception, with your own eyes, and that is, I think, how we should do it. Now, unfortunately, Lightroom doesn't give us that preview, and that's one of the things that I don't like about Lightroom. I want a compression preview. Anyway, if you need to pinpoint that exact spot where the compression still works for the given application, then iResize is a good tool. But in general, just to recap, Heath, great new development. I think that's a really good step in the future, even though the name, we were so used to JPEG. Heath. It doesn't matter. In the end, it doesn't matter. In the end, it matters that our web pages load faster and stuff is just a bit more smooth and has a bit better features. So Heath will come, I think. But at this point, JPEG is the way to go. And that was it for this short episode of Tips on the Top Floor. The Bokeh Slack Challenge is still up. If you want to participate, go to tfttf.com/yslack, WHYSLACK. If you want to send in a question for the show, hey, speak it into the voice memo app of your choice and send it to voice@tfttf.com. I'll promise I'll make you sound good. That's voice@tfttf.com. And thanks again to all you amazing supporters out there. You are making a difference. Find out more at tfttf.com/support. Music for the show by Jeff Smith, Kevin MacLeod, and Hans-Peter Gagerud. Publishing and Slack challenges by Release Pixie, Matt Revsitar Armstead. Slack invitations by Chief Invitation Officer, CIO Russ. My name is Chris Marquardt. Follow me on Facebook or on Twitter at Chris Marquardt, Chris MARQUARDT. And of course, go out and take amazing photos. Be nice to each other. And happy shooting.